What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Plenty to get to today, recapping the week's Champions League action, and then the investigation is done. The report is out. So I will be talking Greg Berhalter, the Reynas, U.S. men's national team, all of that and what we have learned this week in the second segment. So stay tuned for that. But like most weeks on this show, starting with the Champions League, this set of games, not all that compelling in terms of aggregate scoreline, at least three of the four. But there are some other things to talk about, most notably what Manchester City did to Leipzig, and specifically what Erling Haaland did to Leipzig. I have said this before, and this was another example of it, so I'm going to bring it up again. We got to stop having this conversation about whether Erling Haaland fits into City's system. He doesn't. It's not a perfect fit. He is not being maximized. And that's okay. It's working just fine anyway. Talking about fit and talking about whether they can figure out how to implement him is missing the point because he and Pep just do different things. He is so good and that team is so good, it just doesn't matter. Could it potentially be the difference between them winning a Champions League and them coming up short again? The fact that you're not going to be able to play the way Pep wants and to get the most out of Haaland. Yes, it could be. It could also be the opposite. That the missing ingredient, the plan B, the ability to improvise when you can't have control of a game, when things aren't going your way, when you just can't put the ball in the back of the net, when you aren't creating the chances, could be the difference that allows them to get over the hump and actually win this competition. Erling Haaland scored 5 goals. I believe they were all unassisted on 8 total shots in this game. And he's also ruthlessly efficient from the penalty spot. So, he gets them all 3 points against Crystal Palace over the weekend in a game where they weren't great. And then he does what he did against Leipzig. That is something Manchester City simply haven't had because I'm not even sure there's another player in the world that offers it. Lewandowski, maybe. Benzema, maybe on occasion. But Haaland is just a different kind of specimen. Not that necessarily makes him better than those players. You can have that argument. But it's just his ability to create something out of nothing because of his physical presence and his technical ability and his athleticism. They started the game fine. Nothing spectacular. And then they get fortunate with the penalty. Was it a handball? Yeah, probably. There's also, there's nothing Benjamin Hendricks can do about that. The issue is with the rule, not with the decision, though. So he converts that. And then immediately, just anticipation, right spot. De Bruyne does a De Bruyne thing, somehow gets that ball off of the woodwork with his left foot. Haaland's there to knock it in, and all of a sudden, this game that was just kind of going along is 2-0 and basically over. And then you add the third, and then the fourth, and then the fifth. I'm not going to spend too much time on the 7-0 and what it means. Manchester City have done this before. There are games where they're just unstoppable, and there's nothing you can do about it. What I do want to talk about is how, at least in the first half, this was not one of those games. They came out with another one of these strange variations of the 3 in the back without wingbacks thing. But instead of having, for example, Bernardo Silva cover that space, there was just nobody covering that space. John Stones was not playing as a right back. John Stones was playing as a holding midfielder. Anytime somebody was popping up in the spot you would expect a right back to be, it was Kevin De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva, whichever one was kind of deeper on the right side because they were both playing over there. Neither of them had defensive responsibilities. Manuel Akanji was covering half the field by himself. John Stones was not getting right. If it's Rico Lewis, usually what you see is that when City have the ball, he turns into a midfielder. He gets up the field, so they turn it from a four in the back to a three in the back, and then Rico Lewis's responsibility, and so same with João Cancelo when he was there, was to get back and turn it into a four in the back for defensive purposes. They weren't even doing that in this game. Now, Leipzig were not able to capitalize on it. Christopher Nkunku would have really helped with that. But it's another example of Pep doing something unnecessary and trying to tweak things when they're the better team. And so I'm concerned we're going to see this as they get deeper into the competition with teams that can hurt them more. And then you look at some of the other things that happened after they went up 2-0 kind of out of nowhere. Ederson comes flying out of the net, somehow not only gets away with it, I think it was Conrad Lime or maybe it was Werner, one of the two, that he destroyed. He actually got the foul called and drew a yellow card for dissent. It could have been a red. I don't think it was. But you can't put yourself in that position if you're Ederson. This game changes, maybe, if he gets sent off there. There was no need. You're up 2-0, 3-1 on aggregate. And there was that stretch where Leipzig were playing really well. They kind of got themselves back into the game, got a hold of things. And for a Pep, for a team managed by Pep who obsesses over control, they didn't have a lot of it, even though they won this thing 8-1 on aggregate. They didn't have a lot of it in the first leg, particularly in the second half, and there were stretches, even when they were up 2 goals, where they didn't really have control. And it didn't matter because Erling Haaland did Erling Haaland. And part of this is Leipzig, trying to play from the back. That was a disaster. They weren't good enough to take advantage of this kind of stuff. This was going to end one way. But it's much more interesting for me to look at this in terms of what can we learn about potential shortcomings for City, about potential roadblocks for City, than to sit here talking about how they beat Leipzig 7-0. So that's where I kind of had my focus, because frankly, I wasn't all that impressed in the first half. I know they scored 3 goals. And that's also kind of the point I'm trying to get at here. Is that you have to be able to do things like this to win a Champions League, because you're not going to be able to control a game for 90 minutes. If you're facing a Real Madrid, if you're facing a... Real Madrid's just the best example because they're so good at just having everything kind of change on a dime. Maybe a Napoli with how good they are on the ball. Things are going to happen when you start playing the best teams in the world here in the quarterfinals. You have to be able to overcome those moments. And you have to be able to excel despite not being able to do what you want with plan A. And Erling Haaland is by himself a plan B. There's going to be criticism because sometimes it's not going to look great. Because again, they are not maximizing him by any stretch of the imagination. And he is still going to be worth way more than they actually paid for him because they got a steal. Because he's going to have games like this. And on any given day, he can just win it for you. The combination of him and everything else they offer is why I am much more optimistic about this team winning this competition this season. I think I've talked about this a little bit before. I'm a big believer in this idea that for me to believe something different is going to happen, there has to be something different to point to. Erling Haaland is something different to point to. You saw it in this game. You saw it, the way he won the point against Crystal Palace with that penalty, because he does that effortlessly too. He is just a goal-scoring machine. It's not going to look pretty every game. He's not going to score every game. But the other part of this is, and this is the one thing I have never understood, and I talked about this when they signed him. He is on pace to be the most prolific goal scorer in the history of the Champions League. Every single marker, he's now at, I think it's 33. He got to the 30 mark. Broke another record there. He's done it at 3 different clubs with 3 different sets of talent around him. Salzburg, Dortmund, now City. He is at his best against the best levels of competition, which is why he was going to succeed in the Bundesliga and why he was going to succeed in the Premier League. This isn't complicated. Some of his best performances have come in the highest level of competition available in this sport. And you saw it again with what he did in this game. This just doesn't need to be complicated. He is brilliant. They are brilliant. Sometimes it's going to work together. Sometimes it's going to be one or the other. But what makes this so intriguing for City and why I thought this was such an important signing is that maybe if you get enough of both of those individually, it covers up those gaps that have cost them in seasons past. We'll have to wait to see, but that is something to keep an eye on and what I was thinking about as he terrorized Leipzig here. Second game to get to, Real Madrid 1, Liverpool 0. 6-2 Real Madrid on aggregate. This one was decided in the first leg when Real Madrid scored 5 unanswered goals. Got to give Liverpool credit. I mean, they played well, gave themselves at least kind of an opportunity here. Alisson had to make a couple huge saves early. Makes a point-blank save on Vinicius. Pushes Eduardo Camavinga's shot off the bar. And keeps Liverpool in this game. And then Liverpool gets some chances. But one of the more interesting parts of this, to the extent that a 1-0 game when the team that didn't score needed to score 3 times to force extra time, was just how aggressive Real Madrid were coming out of the gates. There was no sitting back, no kind of conservative approach. They were going to finish this thing off, and Liverpool were going to try and get themselves back into this tie. And so it made for a really, really good game, even if it had ended 1-0, and even though it wasn't competitive at all in aggregate score. Both of these teams, this looked like some lesser version of the Champions League final kind of thing with the level of play. Obviously, it's just a different context. You can't simulate a one-off when you know you have a 3-goal cushion. I'm not saying it felt like a Champions League final, but Liverpool came out with the right mentality to make this a really appealing game, even though it ultimately was not interesting in terms of the end result. And Real Madrid had the better chances. They could have put this thing away earlier. They finally do with Benzema. He comes with a little bit hobbled after the goal, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. There isn't too much else to say here. I've talked extensively about Liverpool at this point, both Premier League-wise and after the first leg. They are who they are. They can rise to the occasion. They can play with anybody in the world. They can beat anybody badly. They can also lose to anybody, as you saw over the weekend. And it's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be a combination of both. They're going to have that inconsistency just like Spurs. They're not rolling off 10 straight wins here. I also don't think this is the end of the world. You get back at it. You feel good about the effort you put in. Klopp has to be pleased, even though they didn't score. And then you take and apply that to the Champions League race and try and get back, the top 4 race and try and get back next season. On the Real Madrid side, again, a very impressive performance. Got to give them credit. Didn't think they were going to be quite that aggressive. But they really went to kind of finish this thing off, and ultimately they did. No stress whatsoever. And I haven't talked about this too much on the show, so I'll take a minute here. Champions League, two different things. This Real Madrid team was impressive by and large over these two legs. Could very well go on and win this whole thing again. Would I pick them? No, but they could absolutely do it. And we're heading into a Clasico this weekend where Barcelona, if I remember off the top of my head correctly, I'll get to it in the weekend look ahead, can build a double-digit lead in La Liga. This Real Madrid team has not been great this season. They haven't been great by and large in La Liga. Even if you go look at when they won the 3 Champions Leagues in a row, they weren't great in La Liga. They have not figured out how to consistently put together week after week the results they need. The way Barcelona have, the way Atletico Madrid have a couple times. But this competition, none of that matters. Obviously, they have whatever, they've got some kind of magic that works for this competition. Just don't go taking what happens in this competition and making it a commentary without the other context. This is the same thing where, we've got first 4 games in the NCAA tournament going on right now. It is the same idea as North Carolina making last year's Final Four on the men's side and then failing to make the tournament this season after everybody picked them as the number 1 team in the country preseason. Single elimination knockout tournaments where strange things happen and all you need to do is find a way to win are not indicative of how good of a team you are. They're just not. Some teams are better at them than others. Real Madrid are tremendous in the Champions League. I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that they have been bad in La Liga. Some teams are just like that. It's fine. But it's why I've kept them outside the top 5 of my top 25 basically the entire season, except for the beginning where they were pretty consistent. Because Barcelona are just better. But Barcelona had the, bad draw in the Champions League, didn't take care of business, bad draw in the Europa League, lost to Manchester United. And so there's this weird disparity where Barcelona are the better team. They've proved it in the head-to-head matchups. And yet here's Real Madrid back in the quarterfinals of the Champions League and Barcelona's out of European competition entirely. Just don't get that twisted. The league has to count for something. Consistency has to count for something. Champions League counts for something different. It's why you just never rule Real Madrid out. They have earned that. The path they went through last year, there was no doubt they were deserving champions. It doesn't mean they were the best team in the competition, and they're not the best team in the competition this season. Just want to get that off my chest. Up next, going to talk quickly about Inter and Porto, the one of these 4 ties that was actually really compelling from start to finish, because you just had the 1 goal separating the teams from the first leg. This one ends scoreless. Really impressed with Porto. They just got to be sitting there wondering what else they could have done. I mean, they had a ball cleared off the line and hit the woodwork twice in stoppage time. All that happened in stoppage time. They had chances in the first leg. They had chances before that in the second leg. They just couldn't take them. It happens sometimes. But again, that's why this competition is not a larger commentary on anything. It was 50-50. Because obviously, if Inter had to go chase the game, this would have played out a little bit differently. They were trying to hold on to a lead rather than trying to overcome a deficit, so they played more conservatively as a result. These two teams are very much on the same level, at least through these 2 games. And, Inter haven't been all that consistent in Serie A. They're still up there in second, though. But I just want to take a minute to give a shout out to Porto. Because this is these Portuguese teams are really showing up, and they are legitimately good. They're not just happy to be there. They are more than capable of going toe-to-toe with these teams that are just kind of there from the 5 major leagues. Okay, now Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern, different discussion. But your Inters, your Leipzigs, your Eintracht Frankfurts, absolutely, these Portuguese teams can belong, and they're proving it. They did it last season. They're doing it again this time. Inter ultimately, though, go through. They got the goal. They found a way. They found a way to survive that crazy ending, and so congratulations to them. I'm gonna talk about this more at the end, so I'm not gonna get into it here. But really compelling. Like I said, you didn't have a lot of that in these 4 games, but this one absolutely delivered, and it's Inter who ultimately go through. And then finally, Napoli do what is expected and destroy Frankfurt again. 3-0, 5-0 on aggregate. Napoli have played 8 games in the Champions League. They've scored at least 3 goals in 6 of them. Another one was the first leg where they scored 2. They're absolutely brilliant. Osimhen scores twice. Looks like he hurts his wrist on the second one, but he stays in the game. That was really good news. Looks like he's going to be okay. First quarterfinal appearance ever for Napoli. Absolutely remarkable. By going on and on about this team, there isn't anything more to say. Other than, once again, just doing what they're supposed to every single week. And this is why I have them number 1 in my top 25 and why I believe they're the best team in the world. Again, doesn't mean they're going to win the Champions League. But Arsenal are heading into a second leg of a Europa League tie against Sporting Lisbon, tied. Napoli are headed to the quarterfinals of the Champions League after winning 5-0 on aggregate. Yes, it's Eintracht Frankfurt. The level of competition hasn't been spectacular. I get it and acknowledge it. But we're about to find out exactly how good this team is because they're going to get their crack, hopefully. Or if they don't get it in the quarterfinals, I fully expect them to go through and eventually they're going to get their shot at one of the big boys. And I will be rooting really hard for them because this is a terrific story. And I feel very good about their chances. They are absolutely brilliant. I am so happy they're going to continue this run. And I've said this before, but just across the board, they're not hurting themselves at all in Serie A with this deep run. They are deep, so they had a stretch without Osimhen. Just didn't matter. And I have some more thoughts that I'm going to save when their time in this competition comes to an end about kind of legacy and moving forward. I'm not going to get into that here because we get to talk about Napoli some more since they are through to the quarterfinals. The last thing I do want to get to here, just looking at these quarterfinalists. 3 teams from Italy, 2 from England, 1 from Germany, 1 from Spain, 1 from Portugal. 3 Italian teams. Napoli never been before. Inter, it's been over a decade, if I remember correctly. And AC Milan, it's been a while too. First on the Italy side. Absolutely massive. Is it some larger commentary on how good the league is relative to everybody else? No. Just like when the Pac-12 teams make a run in March or the Big Ten fails to get to a Final Four or fails to win a national championship, it's not some larger commentary on the conference. Because again, 2 separate things. You can't use single elimination tournaments to go make statements and draw conclusions about 30 plus games in a league season. The Milan clubs have not been good this season. It's part of the reason why Napoli are running away with the league. Other part of it is Napoli have been brilliant. But here they are in the quarterfinals. They found a way. They got some fortuitous draws. Neither of them had to play somebody that particularly scares you. And they both got through. It wasn't pretty. They easily both could have been eliminated, to further my point. But they got through. And at some point, this had to happen. I've talked about this before. It doesn't change how I feel about the league because it's just down right now. Outside of Napoli. Napoli have really kind of saved Italy this season in a lot of ways. But you got 3 teams here. And they earned their spots. Again, it was, some very tight aggregate score lines. But you can't say they didn't deserve it. It was 50-50s. They ended up on the right side of it. And for a league that is relying on right now the Milan clubs and Napoli and Lazio and Roma to carry them because Inter are dealing with, or not Inter, sorry, Juventus are dealing with all of the issues and the points deduction and all that. One of these teams needed to start delivering, and you needed Napoli to actually show up in the Champions League, and it's all happened. And so this is a huge development for Serie A moving forward, to not just have, four teams that are interesting, to not just have an interesting title race, but to have 3-4 teams entering this competition that can actually make a deep run and not just have Juventus and the rare occurrence where somebody makes a Cinderella run like Roma did that one year. Your last two champions, after not performing well in the previous two seasons, right after winning those titles, they have finally figured this out, got through their groups, and are now through to the quarterfinals. That's a big deal. The other part of this is Italy has 3 teams here and the Premier League has 2. I just get really tired of these narratives. You can't beat Manchester City because of all the money and how much better they are than everybody else. You can't compete with the Premier League because of all the money they have and the TV deal and blah, blah, blah. Is it a balanced situation? No, of course it's unequal. This sport is built on being unequal. It always makes me laugh when I see somebody like Real Madrid and Florentino Perez complaining about this. How does he think Elche feels when they got to compete against Real Madrid every season? Just throwing a team out there. That's the beauty of the sport. It's inherently imbalanced. Nobody's trying to make it balanced. Doesn't mean it can't be done. Again, Manchester City, PSG haven't won the Champions League. PSG already at home. You got Manchester City and a Chelsea team that's starting to figure things out, but nobody's inspired by representing the Premier League here. Spurs couldn't take care of a AC Milan team they're better than. Liverpool gave up 5 unanswered goals at home. I'm just tired of this conversation. Embrace the challenge. Embrace the difficulty of it. And also remember that this has been happening. The Premier League haven't dominated the Champions League. Sure, you've got some examples, and yes, Chelsea won one. They obviously beat Manchester City. Liverpool have gone to a lot of finals. The Premier League has been prominently featured in the Champions League final. But you also have Real Madrid winning and Bayern beating PSG. And now you got 2 teams left. And if Chelsea wins, it's another one. It's an underdog story. The way they've been going, like the last one was. Again, context with all this matters. So either Manchester City is going to win, or we're going to get reminded again that the Premier League just isn't as dominant of a force as everybody kind of makes it out to be sometimes. To me, it's just an excuse and a proactive way to justify you falling short, when there's no reason to go looking for that explanation, because it doesn't happen as often as people think it does. Money doesn't buy you success. It buys you more options. It buys you opportunities. But ask Manchester City and PSG how all that money's working. And ask Real Madrid how their system is working, or Bayern. And now we got two Premier League teams, only one of which is really considered a contender left. And we got 3 teams from Italy. Just keep that in mind the next time you start hearing people talk about all this imbalance with the Premier League and how it's unfair and the Premier League's destroying everything. Yes, there is some truth to that. It needs to be acknowledged. It's part of what's going on in the sport. But it's not ruining the Champions League. The Premier League teams need to be doing a lot better for that to be happening.